Welcome back. Welcome to this session of L&J's Morning Break. We are unfortunately back to talking about COVID-19. We thought we were past this, but with the surge in infections and hospitalizations and the various debates about mask mandates, there's no way we can avoid talking about COVID again. So we're back, and we're going to talk today about what's happening now. Today we've got Jamie Lyons and Taylor Mathis with us. Hi, guys.
Hi.
They're going to present today a couple of quick administrative things. So many of you have done this before. If you have questions, we're going to try to get to your questions. We may not get to all of them. Ask them in the question section of the menu if you're on a computer. If you're on a phone or tablet, the question mark will work. We also love to hear your comments, particularly about topic ideas for future sessions. So send those in questions as well, or just say hi. We love to hear from you. The top 5 questions and comments are going to get this awesome, super soft L&J t-shirt. We're going to pick among you guys. So definitely get in your questions and comments. Also, you've seen this before, but at ljlaw.com resources, the resources section, we've got a huge amount of stuff for you to use and share with your boards. We've got forms, articles, samples, quick facts on everything you could use for your community. So please visit those and let us know if you have ideas on ones you'd like us to do, articles or quick facts. So we're going to get started. Taylor is starting us today. Taylor, thanks.
All right, so the first topic we're going to cover is revisiting mask guidelines and what's changed in the past few months. As you all may already know, on July 27, the CDC updated their guidance on mask wearing to state that even fully vaccinated people are encouraged to wear masks when they are in public, indoors, in an area of substantial or high transmission of COVID-19. And as of the date of this webinar, that's pretty much every county in the state of Georgia. If you want to check the status of the risk in your county, you can go to the CDC website. They actually have an integrated county viewer, which will show you the status. But generally, this recommendation covers everywhere in Georgia. And so they are saying even if you're fully vaccinated, you are encouraged to mask up in these indoor areas. Now, a day after this recommendation was updated from the CDC, the mayor of Atlanta, Mayor Bottoms, issued an executive order that actually requires individuals to mask up when in public areas, which applies to the city of Atlanta. Now, one important key takeaway from this executive order is that it requires individual compliance. So there's nothing in this order that requires the corporations that are allowing people to enter or use them to enforce this restriction. The other important takeaway is that there are a number of exceptions to this order. One, for example, is it does not apply to residences or residential property. But we've seen over the past couple of weeks, many of these counties and different cities that have pulled back these masking requirements are slowly reinstating them. Just yesterday, Fulton County issued new guidance that they're going to begin requiring masks in all county buildings again. And it's not just Fulton County in the city of Atlanta, it's slowly going around the state. And so one of the questions we keep getting is, should we reinstate mask requirements in our community associations, or if we still have them, should we keep them in place? And are we required to do so by the mayor's executive order and by the CDC's recommendations? And in our opinion, the answer is no, you're not required to implement any mask recommendations or restrictions in your community. However, just because you are not required to do so doesn't mean that you shouldn't, or doesn't mean that you shouldn't consider implementing some sort of rule that addresses mask wearing in your community. Now, when you're trying to decide whether or not this makes sense for your community, you should consider the type of community you have or that you're operating or managing. For example, if you are a homeowners association and you don't have a lot of indoor common shared property, then it might not make sense at this time to create a mask requirement. If, on the other hand, you live in a condominium high-rise building and you have a number of indoor amenities and shared areas like lobby, concierge, if you have any indoor amenities, it might make sense to think about a mask requirement as a rule for your community if you have the authority to create that rule. Now, the biggest takeaway is if you're going to implement one of these rules, you need to make sure that you are ready to enforce it and that you're ready to take enforcement action against people that do not comply with the rule. A lot of communities want to make these rules, but don't want to get into owner issues trying to address compliance. And so if you're not prepared to take on that enforcement action, another option might just be to encourage people in the community about mask wearing, to educate them about these new updates, to put out CDC or Georgia Department of Public Health related guidance in your communities so that these individuals know what is expected of them, what is required if they're in the city of Atlanta or anywhere else with these requirements, so that they can make those decisions without the board having to play police basically, and making sure that they are checking and confirming that you are always in compliance. Now, another question with the mask wearing that's coming up more frequently, and we're seeing it change, is associations requiring vaccines. And I'll go to Jamie to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, before I hit the vaccine piece, there's one question that's up on the screen that I want to make sure everybody hears, which is, can the association impose a fine for someone who is not wearing a mask in the event the association has a rule that requires masking in common areas? And just like any other common area rule and regulation, if you're allowed to fine according to your documents, then you could, as an association, impose a fine against someone in the event that they're violating whatever that masking rule is that you've got. And again, if you're not willing to enforce it that way, you should think twice about actually imposing the rule in the first place, as Taylor mentioned. So that's kind of the same theme as far as requiring vaccines. What are you willing to enforce? So the question has come up over and over again. It's now the sort of hot topic conversation is, can the association require their individual owners and or residents to be vaccinated, especially if they're using the common areas, common elements, the amenities, things of that nature. We're writing an e-blast about that, and we've been writing it actually for about a month, and it keeps changing because COVID keeps changing. So stay tuned for more information in more detail. But the other thing that I want to make sure that you guys understand is that in our opinion, the association probably can require vaccinations. The issue isn't can you require it, it's are you willing to enforce and implement it? And in addition to implementation and enforcement, what is your insurance requirement about this, and how are we keeping this information if we are in fact requiring and gathering vaccination information? So I told you we've been writing this e-blast for about a month. Our first original thought in writing the e-blast was no way. Don't require vaccinations because that's socially unacceptable. No one is doing it. How are you gonna, like, what gives you the authority to do so? And as you guys all know, the tide is changing on this topic. I mean, clearly the EEOC is allowing employers to require their employees to be vaccinated. And I'm sure all of you are watching the news. Google, Disney World, Walmart, Uber, Facebook, L&J are requiring our employees to be vaccinated. We are gathering information from our employees about their vaccination status and requiring vaccinations because it impacts the health of the entire company. And in all of these circumstances, the EEOC and case law is now showing that organizations such as universities and employers are entitled to require vaccinations. Does that mean associations can? Well, there's no state or federal law or EEOC guidelines about this kind of stuff as far as yes or no, but there also is no state law prohibiting business operators from requiring vaccinations, just like there's no state law prohibiting business operators from requiring masks to use their business, at least not yet. So we have to evaluate the pros and cons for each association. And the biggest con in dealing with, vaccination status of your owners and occupants and residents is, are you really going to be enforcing this provision? So if you're going to require owners and residents to tell you whether or not they're vaccinated, are you planning on like using a vaccination passport, like a key fob to get into the building? Are you going to ask people for their vaccination cards when they're going to go into the pool or use the fitness facility or an elevator? And if what I'm saying makes you think, what? No way, you're probably not going to enforce it. And like any other rule for the common property, if you're not going to enforce it, do not implement it. So if what I'm saying sounds like something that you would be willing to do because your community is small and everyone is interested in keeping track of the status, then maybe this does make sense for you. One of the questions that's asked, and I want to be very, very clear about this, associations are not required to comply with HIPAA. HIPAA is a federal law that impacts health professionals. The associations are not required to comply with HIPAA, which means you're not, as a medical provider, is not allowed to disclose information about their patients. Associations are not medical providers. That same law does not apply to associations. However, if you are thinking of keeping vaccination status of any people that are using or occupying your property, one of the things you need to think about is the security implications and the privacy implications if that information gets hacked. Not because you have to comply with HIPAA, but because of identity theft. And we are seeing this obviously all over the world now as far as identity theft and theft of electronic information. Some of you guys have associations that have insurance policies against cyber that protect against cybercrime. And if you do, you're in better shape. And if you don't, check out your insurance policy. Make sure you are covered properly. Also make sure that there's no exceptions to your policy, that you're going to get kicked out of coverage in the event you collect this information and don't properly store it. So there's a lot of different pieces to this. If you're thinking of doing this, if you're thinking of requiring vaccinations, please check in with us before you do that, because there's a lot of detail that we need to go through. Of course, last thing I want to mention is if you're going to require vaccination status, you are going to have to give an exemption for religious and medical-based exceptions. So what that looks like as far as what a religious-based exception looks like and what does a medical exception look like differs from in different areas. Different companies, different positions, essentially. So we can give you advice on the types of forms you can use, the types of things you can look at, the types of things you can ask your owners and residents for and about those exceptions and exemptions. But those do have to apply in every single circumstance. So we can talk in more detail about that if you or your association is thinking about that. I want to shift gears for just a sec before we go back to Taylor and shift from requiring vaccines to a discussion that we have had over and over again, which is why this session is called the merry-go-round, because here we are back going around again with the exact same type of discussions. This one is about what to do if you know that someone is COVID positive in your community. And what we talked about months ago, almost a year ago, is the type of communication that you can send out to your owners in the event you find out about a COVID positive case. Now, you can't require your owners or residents to tell you if they are COVID positive. You can request it, but you can't really require it. And even if you require it, they could just lie and not tell you. So you don't want to require it because they could just lie. So what I want you guys to know is right this second, and it could change 10 minutes from now, CDC guidelines say that fully vaccinated people, even if they have close contact with someone who has tested positive, a fully vaccinated person isn't even required to quarantine. They're suggested to get tested 3 to 5 days later, and if they're positive, then deal with it, and if they're not positive, just keep on moving. So we've got a little bit of a difference here in CDC guidelines as far as quarantining when you are close contact with a COVID positive person than we had a year ago, because now we have fully vaccinated people. However, there are going to be people in your communities that are not fully vaccinated. So to the extent that the association board or a committee member or the manager knows that someone has tested positive, if they have volunteered that information, if you have that information available to you, you don't want to have superior knowledge. You don't want to have the association with information that could harm someone else that you do not share with others. So it's a good idea, if you do find out about a COVID positive case, to send out a broad general communication to your members. Hey, we have a COVID positive case on the property. No owner names, no owner addresses. We're not going to include personal information, but we're going to disclose that we have knowledge that there is a COVID positive case. I mean, we all know that like almost every single person being hospitalized or dying right now of COVID is unvaccinated. So to the extent that we have information about a COVID positive case on the property and we do not disclose it, that could impact the health, safety, and welfare of someone who is unvaccinated, as well as someone vaccinated, but more likely someone who is unvaccinated. We want to make sure we disclose that information to everybody. So yeah, that's where we are on that piece, on disclosure. Similar type of disclosure, but a little bit different reasons and circumstances surrounding that. One of the other things that we talked about many, many months ago was the COVID-19 Pandemic Business Safety Act. And Taylor's going to give us an update on where we are with that state law. And it is a Georgia-only state law.
Yes. So the COVID-19 Pandemic Business Safety Act is something that we have discussed on previous morning breaks, and we also have some additional e-blasts and information on our firm resource page. But as a quick refresher, this law went into effect last year in August, and it addresses certain COVID-19 related liability issues. The first piece of this act is that it can shield certain corporations, which includes community associations, from liability for damages in a lawsuit for claims related to COVID-19 related transmission, infection, or exposure. So under the Act, a community association as a corporation and its directors and officers are not going to be held liable for damages in a COVID-19 related claim. Now, that said, there is an exception to this, and that is if the person suing can show that the association director or its officer was acting grossly negligent, was showing willful or wanton misconduct, was recklessly inflicting harm, or was intentionally inflicting harm. And these are very high thresholds to meet in a court of law. And so basically what this does is it discourages people from bringing lawsuits for COVID-19 related claims because they would have to show this higher standard. However, it does not prevent people from bringing lawsuits. They're still able to. This just helps to reduce the liability exposure for a community if someone were to sue. Now, the second big piece of the act, which we've gone over in some other morning breaks as well, is that community associations can also have a defense under the act, that a person that receives COVID-19 or is transmitted or infected with it on the common property is said to have assumed the risk of doing so if we have certain signage on our common property. And so you've probably seen the signage. I know I see it when I go into Target. I see it in many different community associations, but the signage is standard. The language we do have on our firm resources page, if you want to take a look at that. But in order to have this assumption of risk defense apply, you need to have the signage in your community. It should be on the entrance of each amenity or on the entrance of the community. The sign needs to be separate from all other signs, and the language needs to be in Arial font, at least 1 inch. And it needs to use the exact language from the statute. So make sure to cross-reference any signs that you currently have up with that language. Make sure that you still have those up. If you don't have those up, go ahead and put them up. Now, here's the update with this. Initially, the act was set to expire, so to only apply to claims through July of this year. It was July 14, 2021. However, the Georgia legislature passed a bill extending this deadline, and Governor Kemp signed that bill into law. So now the Act's protections extend until July 14, 2022. So this is great news because we now have an extension of that reduced liability risk bill that adds some protections signed into law. And so you want to make sure that you have the signage up to date. If you have any questions, reach out to us. But that's the big update, and we're excited about it. Now, one thing to remember, like I said, is this act does not prohibit people from bringing lawsuits against the association. It just is designed to discourage that. And in the event that we are sued, we have stronger defenses to try and defend that lawsuit. So when we're acting and operating our amenities, we want to make sure that we're still considering what is reasonable, what precautions we should be taking in operating the amenities. But we do have that added protection from the Act's extension.
Thanks, Taylor.
Great. Thank you, guys. A couple closing things, a speed round for you guys.
Right.
So Jamie and Taylor, do we reimpose distancing and mask requirements at our pools? Do we go backwards? Yes or no?
So I think pool season is almost over, so I'm not so worried about that. And outdoors is not seeming to be the issue. Actually, being outdoors is sort of a secondary protection in addition to being vaccinated, in addition to masking. So when you're outdoors, I don't think we need to worry about that.
What about in our shared space lobbies, clubhouses, elevators in communities that have those mask requirements? Yes or no?
Yeah, so when you have the common property, I think it's a question of, number one, is that something that you think would be applicable for your community? If you have a lot of indoor areas, then maybe yes. But then the biggest piece of this is, are you willing to enforce if people aren't following the rules? And if you're willing to take that step, we say yes. If not, then maybe you take the approach of encouraging people to comply voluntarily.
Agreed.
I agree. Big philosophical discussion about our vaccinated people obligations to the world. Okay, what about if you do impose something like a vaccination requirement? We discussed the exceptions for religious and medical reasons. What about my minister doesn't believe in the vaccine and tells us not to do it?
Yes, so that's not, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of all the experts that are evaluating this type of stuff, that is in and of itself not a religious exemption. A religious exemption is Jehovah's Witness, does not take vaccinations, doesn't take blood transfusions. It's got to be the entire theme of the religion that opposes or doesn't permit vaccinations. It can't be a citation from the Bible or from the Torah or from the Quran that says I shouldn't put anything in my body that I don't want. It needs to be a religion-based exemption.
I agree. Okay, that was awesome.
Before we end, I want to do one last kind of 5-second round on annual meetings, very, very briefly. We need to do a whole nother discussion on annual meetings, but keep in mind, I think where we're going with this, at least where we are right now, is every one of you who's on this call, every manager, every board member needs to be thinking about having annual meetings virtually again. If we're talking about indoor annual meetings, and some associations can certainly have them outside in the cul-de-sac or by the pool if you've got a small number of owners. But if we're talking about a larger group of people, you might want to consider doing it virtually again. And we had extremely good success last year, running annual meetings virtually, and exceptional success, and a lot more involvement with owners voting for election outside of meetings.
If I could add that, Jamie, COVID caught up to us. We've been doing with communities and telling communities that your election should be done either on an online platform or by mail-in ballot for years. There are some communities that have done that for decades. And it clearly is more effective than an in-person election. Now, there is value still in in-person annual meetings to gather, socialize, report, but elections conducted on online platforms or by mail-in ballot absolutely enfranchise our members more, result in more participation, more voting. It is a more democratic approach to elections.
No doubt.
You should do that forever.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for joining us. We miss you guys so much. Hopefully we'll be able to get out and about more and the surge will settle down. Remember to visit our website, ljlaw.com, and check our resources and join us for others. We'll be back with the annual meeting one next. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.